Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The aroma of adobo and pancit drifted through the air of Pacman's kitchen. The restaurant Manny Pacquiao had opened in the heart of General Santos City 2 years earlier. It was an early Tuesday morning when he decided to make a surprise visit to the establishment. The place was beginning to stir with the first customers of the day, mainly local workers who came for traditional Filipino breakfast before heading to their jobs. Manny wore a simple polo shirt and jeans, trying to blend in while observing the restaurant's operations. He always enjoyed these moments of anonymity, when he could see how things really worked without the pressure of his presence as the owner. Staff members moved efficiently between tables, serving steaming plates of tapsilog and strong Barako coffee. That's when his eyes fixed on one of the waitresses. She was a young woman of fragile appearance, perhaps in her early 20s, with long black hair tied in a low ponytail. She carried a tray with one hand, while the other remained strangely motionless at her side. Manny noticed how she struggled to balance the plates, using only her right hand to serve customers. The young woman, whose name tag identified her as Marilu, moved with silent determination between the tables. There was something about her posture that caught attention, a slight tilt of her left shoulder, as if protecting something. Manny watched discreetly as she served a family with 3 small children, smiling gently despite the obvious difficulty she faced. When Marilu passed near where he was sitting, Manny could see more clearly. Her left hand was wrapped in an improvised bandage, made with what appeared to be pieces of clean cloth. The fingertips that showed beyond the dressing were slightly swollen, with a coloration that suggested a recent injury. The restaurant manager, Joaquin, approached Manny's table with a respectful smile. He was a middle-aged man who had worked at the establishment since its opening, known for his dedication and knowledge about each employee. Manny discreetly gestured for him to sit, keeping his gaze on the young waitress, who continued working with impressive determination. Joaquin followed Manny's gaze and his expression became slightly worried. He had noticed the employee's situation over the past few days, but didn't know exactly how to approach the subject. The young woman never complained, never asked for help, and always arrived punctually for work, regardless of circumstances. Manny continued watching as Marilu served 2 more tables. At one moment, when she needed to pick up a heavier plate, he saw a quick expression of pain cross her face. She closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and continued as if nothing had happened. Her dedication to work was evident, but also concerning. The restaurant's activity gradually increased. More customers entered, ordering the famous longsilog that had become a specialty of the place. Marilu continued serving her section efficiently, always smiling at customers, always helpful, always hiding any sign of discomfort she might be feeling. Manny felt something familiar stir in his chest, that same sensation that had accompanied him since childhood in Kibawe, when he saw people silently fighting against adversities. It was the same feeling that motivated him in his charitable actions, the same deep connection with those who faced difficulties without complaining. He knew he needed to discover more about Marilu's situation. There was something in the way she worked, in the silent determination she demonstrated, that reminded him of his own journey and the people who had helped him along the way. The morning sun streamed through the restaurant windows, casting warm light across the busy dining room. Regular customers chatted quietly over their meals, unaware of the small drama unfolding before Manny's observant eyes. The sounds of sizzling pans from the kitchen mixed with the gentle murmur of conversation, creating the familiar atmosphere that made this place special to the community. Marilu moved past his table once more, her professional smile never wavering despite what must have been considerable discomfort. The way she carried herself spoke of someone accustomed to hardship, someone who had learned early in life that complaining rarely solved problems. Manny remained seated at his corner table, nursing his cup of Barako coffee, while maintaining his careful observation of Marilu. The restaurant had grown busier as the morning progressed, with office workers stopping by for quick breakfast before heading to their jobs in the city center. The young waitress moved between her assigned tables with practiced efficiency, but Manny's trained eye caught the subtle signs of someone working through pain. Joaquin had returned to his managerial duties, occasionally glancing back at Manny with understanding. The manager had been in the service industry long enough to recognize when his boss was genuinely concerned about an employee's welfare, rather than simply conducting a routine inspection. There was something different in Manny's expression, a depth of empathy that went beyond mere professional interest. As Marilu approached a table near the window where an elderly couple sat sharing sisig and rice, Manny noticed how she favored her right side completely. When she reached to refill their water glasses, she had to shift her entire body to compensate for the limited use of her left hand. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible to casual observers, but unmistakable to someone who had spent years studying the mechanics of human movement and compensation patterns. The bandage around her hand appeared to be homemade, likely crafted from torn fabric rather than proper medical gauze. The edges were slightly frayed, and Manny could see where it had been rewrapped multiple times, each layer telling a story of resourcefulness born from necessity. The way she held her arm suggested the injury extended beyond just her hand, possibly affecting her wrist or even her forearm. Between serving customers, Marilu would unconsciously cradle her injured hand against her body, a protective gesture that spoke of recent trauma. When she thought no one was watching, her professional smile would falter for just a moment, replaced by a flicker of genuine discomfort that she quickly suppressed before approaching the next table. Manny observed how the other staff members had naturally adjusted their workflow to accommodate her limitation. Teodoro, one of the kitchen assistants, would carry heavier trays to her section without being asked. Esperanza, another waitress, would subtly help with tasks requiring two hands, like setting up larger tables or carrying multiple plates at once. The unspoken cooperation suggested this had been going on for several days, perhaps even weeks. The lunch rush was beginning, and Manny watched as Marilu's determination was tested further. A family of 6 entered and was seated in her section, requiring her to navigate the complexities of a large order while managing her physical limitations. She approached the table with the same gentle smile she offered every customer, pulling out her order pad with her functional hand while keeping the injured one carefully positioned. Taking the order proved challenging. She had to hold the pad steady with her bandaged hand while writing with her right, a process that clearly caused discomfort based on the slight tension visible in her shoulders. At one point, when reaching across the table to point at menu items for a customer who was having difficulty reading, she inadvertently put pressure on her injured hand, and Manny saw her jaw clench almost imperceptibly. What struck Manny most profoundly was her absolute refusal to let her injury affect the quality of service she provided. Despite the obvious challenges, she maintained the same level of attention and care for each customer. When a small child accidentally knocked over a glass of water, she cleaned it up efficiently with one hand, reassuring the embarrassed parents with genuine warmth rather than frustration. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting different shadows across the restaurant floor. Manny realized he had been observing for nearly 3 hours, completely absorbed in this young woman's quiet struggle. Something about her resilience resonated deeply with memories of his own past, of times when he had pushed through adversity without complaint, driven by necessity and an unshakable work ethic. As closing time for the lunch shift approached, Manny made a decision. He needed to understand more about Marilu's situation, not out of mere curiosity, but from a genuine desire to help someone who embodied the same spirit of perseverance that had carried him through his own darkest moments. As the lunch crowd began to thin out, Manny positioned himself strategically near the service station, where staff members briefly gathered between tasks. He wanted to observe Marilu's interactions with her colleagues more closely, hoping to glean additional insights into her situation without directly interfering with the restaurant's operations. Esperanza, the senior waitress who had been subtly assisting Marilu throughout the day, approached the service station to refill water pitchers. Manny noticed how she automatically took extra pitchers, clearly intending to help her injured colleague without making it obvious. The gesture spoke of genuine concern rather than mere workplace courtesy, suggesting that Marilu had earned the respect and affection of her co-workers, despite being relatively new to the team. When Marilu finally had a brief moment to rest, she sat on a small stool behind the counter, carefully unwrapping part of her bandage to examine her hand. From his vantage point, Manny could see that the injury was more severe than he had initially thought. The swelling extended well beyond her knuckles, and the discoloration suggested possible fractures or significant soft tissue damage. What troubled him most was watching her rewrap the bandage with practiced efficiency, as if she had been managing this type of injury for some time. She worked quickly and quietly, clearly not wanting to draw attention to her condition or take more break time than absolutely necessary. The way she tested her grip afterward, wincing slightly but pushing through the discomfort, revealed someone accustomed to working through pain. Joaquin appeared beside Manny's table, carrying a fresh pot of coffee and wearing an expression of quiet concern. The manager had clearly been wrestling with his own observations about Marilou's condition, torn between respecting her privacy and ensuring the welfare of his staff. He glanced toward the young waitress, then back at Manny, his unspoken question hanging in the air. Through careful observation and Joaquin's subtle gestures, Manny began piecing together fragments of Marilou's story. She had started working at the restaurant only 6 weeks earlier, arriving with excellent references but little explanation about her previous employment. She was consistently early for her shifts, never called in sick, and demonstrated a work ethic that impressed even the most demanding customers. The manager's concerned glances toward Marilou revealed that her injury had occurred sometime during her employment, not before. Joaquin had noticed the bandage appearing gradually over the past week, starting as a small wrap around 2 fingers and progressively expanding to cover most of her hand. When he had inquired about it, she had dismissed it as a minor kitchen accident that would heal quickly. However, the progression suggested something far more serious than a simple burn or cut. The way she protected her hand, the careful positioning of her arm, and the obvious pain she experienced when pressure was applied, all pointed to a significant injury that was either not healing properly or had been inadequately treated from the beginning. Manny watched as Marilou prepared to resume her duties for the dinner shift. Despite having worked since early morning, she showed no signs of slowing down or requesting modified duties. She retied her hair, adjusted her uniform, and checked her bandage one final time before returning to her section with renewed determination. The afternoon light filtering through the restaurant windows cast long shadows across the dining room, creating an almost cinematic quality to the scene. Regular customers were beginning to arrive for early dinner, and the familiar rhythm of evening service was starting to build. Marilou moved back into action, her professional demeanor intact despite the physical challenges she faced. What struck Manny most profoundly was recognizing something of himself in her struggle. The quiet determination, the refusal to let circumstances dictate limitations, the pride that prevented asking for help even when desperately needed. These were qualities he understood intimately from his own journey from poverty to success. As he prepared to delve deeper into understanding her situation, Manny felt the weight of responsibility that came with his position and resources. Sometimes the most profound discoveries happened not in boxing rings or legislative halls, but in quiet moments of human observation. As evening approached, Manny made the decision to stay longer than initially planned. He moved to a different table, one that offered a better view of the employee break area, while remaining inconspicuous to both staff and customers. The dinner service was beginning to pick up pace, and he wanted to observe how Marilou's condition affected her performance during the busiest hours of operation. Joaquin approached the kitchen pass-through window, where Benigno, the head cook, was plating orders with practiced precision. Manny noticed the manager's subtle gesture toward Marilou, followed by what appeared to be a brief, concerned conversation. The cook's expression shifted from neutral professionalism to obvious worry as he glanced toward the dining room where the young waitress continued serving customers. What Manny observed next provided crucial insight into the timeline of Marilou's injury. Edgardo, one of the busboys, was carefully avoiding any tasks that would require Marilou to use both hands. When customers at one of her tables finished their meal, instead of waiting for her to clear the dishes as usual, he immediately stepped in to handle the heavier items. This coordinated assistance had clearly become routine, suggesting the injury had been affecting her work for longer than anyone had initially admitted. The most telling moment came when Marilou attempted to carry a large tray of beverages to a family celebration table. Halfway across the dining room, Manny could see her struggling with the weight distribution. Herminio, another server, appeared seemingly from nowhere to assist, taking the tray without fanfare and continuing to the table as if it had been his responsibility all along. The seamless nature of this intervention spoke to a level of protective coordination among the staff that had developed over time. During a brief lull in service, Manny watched Marilou retreat to the employee restroom. She remained inside for longer than a typical break, and when she emerged, Her face showed signs of stress that she quickly masked before returning to work. The way she flexed her fingers and rotated her wrist suggested she was trying to restore circulation or relieve stiffness that had built up throughout the day. Joaquin's behavior throughout the evening provided additional clues. The manager was clearly monitoring Marilu more closely than his other employees, frequently checking on her tables personally and ensuring she wasn't overwhelmed with difficult customers. When a large group requested to be seated in her section, he diplomatically redirected them to another area, citing better lighting for their business meeting. The most revealing observation came near the end of the dinner rush. Marilu was clearing a table when she accidentally knocked over a salt shaker with her bandaged hand. The impact was minimal, but her reaction was immediate and disproportionate. She drew back quickly, cradling her hand against her body with an expression of sharp pain that she couldn't completely hide. The incident lasted only seconds, but it confirmed Manny's growing suspicion that her injury was far more serious than a simple workplace accident. As the restaurant began winding down for the evening, Manny noticed Marilu's energy flagging noticeably. The determined posture she had maintained throughout the day was giving way to obvious fatigue. Her movements became more careful, more calculated, as if each action required conscious effort to avoid aggravating her condition. The interaction between Marilu and Florencio, the elderly dishwasher, provided another piece of the puzzle. The old man's paternal concern was evident as he watched her struggle with tasks that should have been simple. His gentle attempts to help, combined with her polite but firm refusals, painted a picture of someone too proud to accept assistance even when desperately needed. What disturbed Manny most was realizing that this young woman was likely working through a serious injury out of financial necessity rather than choice. The dedication she showed wasn't just admirable work ethic, it was survival instinct. Someone in her position couldn't afford to take time off for proper medical treatment, regardless of the long-term consequences to her health. As the last dinner customers settled their bills and departed into the warm General Santos evening, Manny positioned himself where he could observe the closing procedures. The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted from the bustling energy of service to the quieter rhythm of cleanup and preparation for the next day. It was during these final hours that he would witness something that would fundamentally change his understanding of Marilu's situation. The young waitress had been on her feet for nearly 12 hours, and the accumulated strain was becoming impossible to hide. As she began stacking chairs and wiping down tables in her section, Manny noticed her movements had become increasingly labored. What had started as subtle compensation for her injured hand had evolved into obvious physical distress that affected her entire posture. When Marilu reached for a chair that was positioned awkwardly between two tables, she had to stretch further than comfortable. The movement put unexpected pressure on her injured hand, and for the first time all day, she couldn't suppress her reaction completely. She stopped mid-motion, closing her eyes and taking several deep breaths while supporting herself against the table with her good hand. Joaquin had stepped into his office to complete the day's paperwork, leaving the closing staff to work with minimal supervision. This was when Manny observed the most telling interaction of the entire day. Wilfredo, the senior maintenance worker who was mopping the kitchen area, emerged with a concerned expression that suggested he had been watching Marilu's deteriorating condition throughout the evening. The maintenance worker approached Marilu carefully, carrying a small plastic bag that he pressed into her good hand. Through the clear plastic, Manny could see what appeared to be ice wrapped in a clean kitchen towel. The gesture was performed with such discretion that it was clear this had become a nightly routine, a small act of kindness that helped her manage the pain after her shifts ended. Marilu accepted the makeshift ice pack with obvious gratitude, immediately applying it to her bandaged hand. The relief on her face was immediate and profound, suggesting this was the first time all day she had allowed herself any form of pain management. She sat heavily on one of the chairs she had been stacking, finally permitting herself a moment of vulnerability now that most of the customers and supervisory staff had gone. What Manny witnessed next provided the clearest evidence yet of the severity of her condition. As Marilu carefully unwrapped a portion of her bandage to apply the ice directly to her skin, he could see extensive bruising that extended well beyond what any minor kitchen accident could explain. The discoloration was deep and widespread, consistent with significant trauma that had occurred recently but had not received proper medical attention. The way she rewrapped the bandage afterward revealed practiced expertise born from necessity rather than training. She worked methodically, creating support structures with the limited materials available to her. It was clear she had been managing this injury entirely on her own, without professional medical guidance or adequate supplies. Vicente, the night security guard who was beginning his shift, paused near Marilou's table with obvious concern. His protective instincts were evident as he glanced around the nearly empty restaurant, clearly wanting to ensure she felt safe during the vulnerable moments when she allowed her guard to drop. The paternal way he positioned himself nearby spoke to genuine affection for the young woman who had clearly earned the protective instincts of the entire staff. As Marilou prepared to leave for the night, carefully wrapping her makeshift ice pack for the journey home, Manny realized he was witnessing someone whose circumstances were far more desperate than he had initially understood. The courage required to work a full shift through what was obviously a serious injury spoke to a level of necessity that went beyond simple financial pressure. Manny made the decision to discreetly follow Marilou as she left the restaurant, maintaining enough distance to remain unnoticed while ensuring her safety during the late evening hours. His protective instincts, honed through years of looking after his own family and community, compelled him to understand the full scope of her situation before determining how best to help. Marilou walked slowly through the quieter streets of General Santos, cradling her injured hand against her body while carrying a small backpack with her good hand. Her pace was measured and careful, suggesting that even walking had become challenging after a full day of work. She stopped occasionally at street lamps, using the light to check her bandage and adjust the makeshift ice pack that Wilfredo had given her. As she turned down a narrow side street lined with modest homes, Manny noticed her destination was a small, weathered house with a tin roof and concrete walls painted in faded blue. The property showed signs of financial struggle: patched windows, mismatched roof tiles, and a small garden where vegetables grew in recycled containers. Despite its humble appearance, the area was clean and well-maintained, speaking to residents who took pride in their homes despite limited resources. What Manny observed next provided the shocking context he had been seeking. Through the open front door, illuminated by a single fluorescent bulb, he could see Marilou being greeted by an elderly woman in a wheelchair. The woman's frail appearance and the medical equipment visible in the background immediately explained the desperate circumstances that had driven Marilou to work through a serious injury. The elderly woman, whom Manny surmised was likely Marilou's grandmother or relative, appeared to be suffering from a chronic illness that required constant care. Oxygen tanks stood beside her wheelchair, and various medications were arranged on a nearby table. The cost of maintaining such medical care on a waitress's salary would be overwhelming, especially for someone supporting herself and a dependent family member. Manny watched as Marilou carefully helped the elderly woman with what appeared to be evening medication, using only her uninjured hand while supporting the woman's weight. The tenderness and expertise she displayed suggested this had been her routine for some time, long before her own injury had complicated an already challenging situation. The small house's interior revealed additional evidence of their circumstances. The furniture was sparse but functional, with medical supplies taking priority over comfort items. A makeshift bed had been set up in the main living area, likely to keep the elderly woman close to necessary equipment and assistance. The kitchen was minimal, with basic appliances and evidence that meals were prepared with careful attention to both budget and medical dietary requirements. Most telling was Marilou's immediate attention to her grandmother's needs, despite her own obvious exhaustion and pain. She prepared what appeared to be evening medication, adjusted the woman's position for comfort, and checked various medical readings before finally attending to her own injury. The dedication and sacrifice required to maintain this level of care, while working full-time through a serious hand injury, painted a picture of courage that left Manny deeply moved. As he quietly withdrew from his observation point, Manny understood that he had discovered not just an injured employee, but someone whose circumstances represented the kind of quiet heroism he had witnessed throughout his own journey from poverty. The shocking revelation wasn't just about a workplace injury, but about the extraordinary lengths someone would go to care for family while sacrificing their own well-being. The drive back to his home in Forbes Park felt longer than usual as Manny processed everything he had witnessed. The contrast between his comfortable surroundings and the humble circumstances he had just observed weighed heavily on his mind. The image of Marilou caring for her ailing grandmother, while managing her own serious injury, had struck a chord that resonated deeply with memories of his own family's struggles in Kibawe. Manny remembered his own mother, Dionysia, working multiple jobs to support their family when his father Rosalio had been unable to provide consistent income. The parallels between his childhood observations and what he had witnessed tonight were unmistakable. The same quiet determination, the same refusal to complain despite overwhelming circumstances, the same willingness to sacrifice personal well-being for family obligations. As he entered his house, Manny found Jinky waiting up for him with their children already asleep upstairs. The warmth and security of his home environment highlighted the stark differences between his current life and the reality facing Marilu just a few miles away. The medical equipment he had glimpsed in that small house represented expenses that could easily consume an entire month's wages from restaurant work, leaving nothing for proper treatment of her own injury. The severity of Marilu's condition troubled him more as he reflected on the medical implications. The extensive bruising and obvious pain suggested possible fractures or ligament damage that could result in permanent disability if left untreated. Her makeshift bandages and ice pack therapy were inadequate substitutes for proper medical care, potentially allowing a treatable injury to develop into a lifetime limitation. What disturbed Manny most was recognizing the impossible choice Marilu faced daily. Taking time off for medical treatment would mean lost wages that her grandmother's care required, but continuing to work was likely worsening her condition and jeopardizing her long-term ability to provide that same care. It was a cycle of necessity that trapped her between immediate survival and future well-being. The dedication of the restaurant staff to protect and assist Marilu without being asked spoke to the kind of character she possessed. People didn't naturally rally around someone unless that person had demonstrated genuine worth through their actions and attitude. The fact that experienced workers like Wilfredo and Vicente had adopted protective roles suggested she had earned their respect through consistent demonstration of integrity and work ethic. Manny's thoughts turned to his own foundation work and the countless individuals he had encountered who faced similar impossible circumstances. The difference was that most of those situations had been brought to his attention through formal channels, applications, and structured assistance programs. Discovering someone in need through pure chance felt different, more personal, and somehow more urgent. The irony wasn't lost on him that this discovery had occurred in his own establishment, under his own roof, so to speak. How many other Marilus were working in businesses throughout the Philippines, quietly struggling through circumstances that could be dramatically improved with the right intervention? The thought was both humbling and motivating. As he prepared for bed, Manny knew that sleep would be difficult. The image of Marilu carefully tending to her grandmother, while managing her own pain, had embedded itself in his consciousness. Tomorrow would require action, but it would need to be approached carefully to preserve her dignity while providing the assistance she desperately needed. The weight of his resources and position had never felt more significant than in this moment of understanding someone else's silent struggle. The following morning, Manny arrived at Pacman's kitchen before the breakfast shift began, carrying with him a sense of purpose that had crystallized during a largely sleepless night. He had spent hours developing a plan that would provide Marilu with the help she needed, while preserving her dignity and independence. The approach required careful coordination and sensitivity to ensure she wouldn't feel singled out or embarrassed by his intervention. Joaquin arrived shortly after Manny, surprised to find his employer present so early, but immediately sensing the serious nature of the meeting. The manager's expression shifted from curiosity to deep concern as Manny outlined what he had observed and discovered about Marilu's situation. The revelation that her injury was far more severe than anyone had realized, combined with her home circumstances, caring for an ill grandmother, painted a picture that demanded immediate action. Within the hour, Manny had contacted Dr. Pasita Gonzalez, a highly respected orthopedic specialist in General Santos, who had previously provided medical support for his foundation's health initiatives. The doctor agreed to make an immediate house call, understanding the sensitivity of the situation and the need for discretion. Manny also arranged for a comprehensive medical evaluation and treatment plan that would address both the immediate injury and any long-term rehabilitation needs. The most delicate aspect of his plan involved ensuring Marilu could accept help without feeling her employment was in jeopardy. Manny instructed Joaquin to frame the medical intervention as a standard workplace safety initiative, explaining that the restaurant was implementing enhanced health support for all employees. This approach would allow her to receive treatment while maintaining her sense of professional standing and personal pride. When Marilu arrived for her shift, moving even more carefully than the previous day, she found a different atmosphere in the restaurant. The staff had been briefed about the new health initiative, and everyone understood their role in supporting their colleague without making her feel like a charity case. Esperanza took charge of explaining the program, emphasizing that workplace injuries were the restaurant's responsibility to address properly. The transformation that followed was remarkable. Dr. Gonzalez confirmed that Marilu had been working with multiple fractured bones in her hand and wrist, injuries that could have resulted in permanent disability without proper treatment. The immediate relief she experienced after receiving professional medical care and appropriate pain medication was visible to everyone who had watched her struggle for weeks. More significantly, Manny arranged for a comprehensive care package for Marilu's grandmother, including proper medical equipment, medication supplies, and access to home health services. The financial burden that had driven Marilu to work through her own serious injury was substantially reduced, allowing her to focus on healing without the constant pressure of impossible choices. The ripple effects of this intervention extended throughout the restaurant. Staff members who had quietly worried about their colleague felt renewed pride in working for an establishment that truly cared for its employees. The story of Manny's attentiveness to individual struggles, despite his many responsibilities, reinforced the values that made Pacman's Kitchen more than just a business. For Manny, the experience served as a powerful reminder of why his success carried responsibilities beyond personal achievement. Witnessing Marilu's quiet courage and sacrifice had reconnected him with the fundamental principles that guided his approach to both business and philanthropy. The discovery that significant need existed within his own establishment prompted him to implement systematic programs, ensuring no employee would face such circumstances alone. As Marilu began her recovery with proper medical support and reduced financial pressure, the shocked expression on her face when she realized the extent of the assistance being provided reflected the profound impact of unexpected compassion. The circle of care that had begun with simple observation had grown into a demonstration of how individual attention could transform lives. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.